St. Louis Mayor Lyda Krewson recently spoke out and said she felt justice was not served when a police officer was exonerated of the death of an African-American man. Following the release of the verdict, she said the following in a public statement concerning the trial and the decision. "I am appalled at what happened to Anthony Lamar Smith. I am sobered by this outcome. Frustration, anger, hurt, pain, hope and love all intermingled. I encourage St. Louisans to show each other compassion, to recognize that we all have different experiences and backgrounds and that we all come to this with real feelings and experiences." Neil Bruntrager, Stockley's lawyer, had a response for the mayor and he was not pleased. "How do you promote all those things by creating distrust in a system that clearly worked under these circumstances? It is irresponsible and a disservice to the community to make statements like that. It's an insult to Judge Wilson to make statements like that. And it falsely encourages the belief that an injustice was done here when in fact justice was done." Look at the social media updates online. Fox News reported the following about the ordeal. Members of a crowd of about 1,000 broke at least 2 windows at the home of Mayor Lyda Krewson and threw red paint at the brick house before riot police moved in to disperse the crowd with tear gas, the St. Louis Post-Dispatch reported. There was no indication that Krewson was inside the home at the time, the newspaper reported. Police and bulletproof vests and helmets closed in and demanded protesters get off the lawn and out of the street in front of the house. Officers used tear gas to move the crowd out of the area and the protests were all but dispersed within the next 2 hours. More than 20 arrests were made by early evening, and some protesters were pepper sprayed during confrontations with authorities. St. Louis police reported that 10 officers had suffered injuries by the end of the night, including a broken jaw and dislocated shoulder, and some journalists reported being the target of threats from demonstrators. A freelance Associated Press videographer said a protester threw his camera to the ground and damaged it, and he was later threatened with a beating if he didn't put another camera away. A KTVI reporter said water bottles were thrown at him after a protester taunted him, drawing a crowd. Activists said they would meet again Saturday to plan further demonstrations. St. Louis police said 2 officers were taken to a hospital with injuries suffered from thrown bricks in the central West End district of St. Louis. One officer had a serious injury from a brick thrown at Kings Highway and Waterman, then a second was headed to the hospital as well, the city's police department said. No other information was immediately released. The article continued to explain how the day's events began. The protests began Friday morning after a white former St. Louis officer was found not guilty of first-degree murder in the shooting death of a black suspect. That white officer, former St. Louis police officer Jason Stockley, said Friday that he understands how a video of him fatally shooting Anthony Lamar Smith after a car chase in 2011 looks bad to investigators and the public. But he said the optics have to be separated from the facts and he did nothing wrong. Stockley was found not guilty of first-degree murder in the death of Smith, who was black. The ruling Friday sparked hundreds of people to protest in St. Louis. Stockley told the St. Louis Post-Dispatch that the burden of having to kill someone never totally lifts. The former officer said he was concerned for first responders and protesters and doesn't want to see anyone hurt over the ruling. He said he can feel for and understand what Smith's family is facing, but that he is not to blame. The St. Louis Police Department tweeted earlier Friday evening that the protests were no longer considered peaceful, as demonstrators threw bottles at officers, smashed police vehicle windshields, and largely ignored officers' requests to clear a roadway. Especially in recent years, there has been no respect for law enforcement and this needs to change. It did not used to be like this. However, with Antifa and the far left emerging every time they hear something they don't want, violence erupts shortly thereafter. There is no excuse to threaten and attack police officers who are there to serve and protect the citizens. Ironically, the same citizens who are screaming and yelling at them are calling them murderers. It takes a special kind of human being to be able to endure that and continue.